The invitation had arrived with the careful politeness of a diplomatic note, every sentence padded with reassurance. Joe Rogan read it twice, then once more out loud, as if sound might reveal intent. A guest appearance on The View. A conversation. A chance to bridge divides. Joe snorted and set the phone down. He wasn't allergic to tough rooms, he thrived in them, but this one had rules written in invisible ink. Still, something about the challenge pulled at him. He'd spent years being discussed on that couch without being there to speak for himself. Maybe it was time. The studio hummed with practiced cheer the morning Joe arrived. Stagehands smiled too widely. Producers whispered into headsets, eyes darting between the teleprompter and the couch where the hosts were already settling in, posture perfect, expressions tuned for the audience at home. Joe shook hands, nodded, said little. He could feel the temperature of the room, cool, expectant, almost eager for friction. He reminded himself to breathe, to listen. Conversations didn't have to be wars unless someone brought weapons. The opening minutes were gentle enough. Jokes about his podcast longevity, his love of curiosity, his eclectic guests. Joe leaned back, relaxed, playing along. But beneath the banter, he sensed the turn coming, like the pause before a storm breaks. The questions tightened, tone sharpened. Words like responsibility, platform, and dangerous floated across the table. Joe didn't interrupt. He waited, eyes steady, letting each host finish. Silence, he knew, could be louder than argument. When the first accusation landed, about misinformation and influence, Joe leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Let's slow down," he said calmly. "What do you mean, exactly?" The studio seemed to inhale. A host responded with a list, clips, headlines, secondhand summaries. Joe nodded, then smiled, not mocking, just curious. "Okay," he said. "Now let me ask you something. Have you watched the full conversations? Or are we talking about edited moments?" A ripple moved through the audience. The host bristled, deflecting with confidence. Joe didn't push back aggressively. He asked questions. Simple ones. Who decides what's true? How does context change meaning? Is disagreement the same as harm? With each question, he peeled back the certainty on the couch. The producers shifted in their seats. This wasn't the script. One host tried a different tack, pressing him on accountability. Joe listened, then responded with a story, about sitting across from people he fundamentally disagreed with, about trusting listeners to think for themselves. He spoke about curiosity as a muscle, about conversation as a tool, not a weapon. His voice never rose. He didn't need it to. The contrast between his measured tone and the growing tension across from him did the work. Then came the moment that changed the room. A host interrupted him mid-sentence, dismissing his point with a practiced laugh. Joe stopped speaking. He looked at her, not angry, just present. "Can I finish?" he asked. The simplicity of it cut through the noise. She waved a hand, conceding. Joe finished his thought, slowly, carefully, explaining how silencing conversations doesn't make ideas disappear, it drives them underground. The audience murmured. Even the camera operators leaned in. The discussion escalated, but Joe stayed grounded. When someone accused him of normalizing harm, he asked, who gets to define harm? When another insisted he was reckless, he replied, is questioning power reckless, or necessary? Each answer turned into a mirror, reflecting the certainty back at the questioners. The couch, once unified, began to fracture. Hosts talked over one another, positions overlapping, arguments blurring. Joe remained still, letting the chaos speak for itself. By the final minutes, the energy had shifted entirely. What was meant to be a confrontation had become something else, a live demonstration of two philosophies colliding. Joe thanked them for having him, genuinely. "I think we need more of this," he said, gesturing to the table. "Not less." The applause was hesitant at first, then stronger. As the cameras cut, the studio buzzed with a strange mix of relief and unease. Joe stood, shook hands again, and walked off the set knowing the real conversation was just beginning. Within minutes, clips flooded the internet. Not the kind trimmed to inflame, but long stretches where Joe asked questions and waited for answers. Viewers dissected every exchange, every pause. Some praised him, others fumed, but almost everyone agreed on one thing: the encounter hadn't gone as planned. Backstage, producers huddled, debating damage control. On the couch, the hosts removed their microphones in silence, the earlier confidence replaced by something closer to reflection. Joe's phone buzzed nonstop as he rode back to his hotel. Messages from comedians, scientists, fighters, and everyday listeners poured in. You stayed calm. You made them listen. That was wild. Joe didn't respond right away. He stared out the window, watching the city blur past. He wasn't interested in victory laps. What mattered was whether anyone had actually heard something new. The following morning, headlines screamed from every corner of the media landscape. Some framed it as humiliation. Others called it a wake-up call. A few tried to minimize it altogether. Joe smiled at the variety. Narrative control was a funny thing. Everyone wanted it, no one truly had it. On his podcast that afternoon, he addressed the appearance briefly. No gloating, no anger, just context. It's a weird time, he said. People think talking is dangerous. I think not talking is worse. Meanwhile, the ripples continued. A host from The View defended the show in an interview, insisting Joe had been evasive. Another admitted the conversation had been harder than expected. Viewers noticed the cracks. Comment sections filled with debates that actually referenced ideas instead of insults. College classes played clips. Late-night hosts joked nervously. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not permanently, but enough to be felt. Joe received a message from a young journalist who said the episode had changed how she prepared for interviews. You showed me that listening isn't weakness, she wrote. That one stuck with him. He mentioned it offhand to a friend, shrugging. If one person thinks a little differently, he said, that's something. Days later, a producer from the show reached out, thanking him, quietly, for coming. It wasn't comfortable, the message read, but it was real. Joe appreciated that. Comfort had never been his goal. Curiosity was. He recorded another episode, this time with someone who had criticized him harshly in the past. They disagreed, laughed, found unexpected common ground. The conversation went long. Listeners stayed. The public narrative tried to harden again, teams forming, lines drawn, but it didn't stick as easily. People remembered the calm voice in the storm, the refusal to shout, the insistence on finishing a thought. They remembered the moment the room realized it couldn't steamroll curiosity. That memory lingered, inconvenient and persistent. Weeks later, when asked if he'd do it again, Joe considered the question. He thought about the studio lights, the tension, the sudden quiet when a simple question landed too close to home. Yeah, he said finally. Conversations matter. Even the uncomfortable ones. Especially those. The confrontation faded from the news cycle. Replaced by the next outrage, the next spectacle. But beneath the churn, something remained. A reminder that humiliation doesn't always come from yelling louder or landing sharper insults. Sometimes it comes from refusing to play the game at all. From holding up a mirror and letting others see themselves clearly. And in that moment on live television, with millions watching, that was exactly what happened.